Since I started the channel, I think it was the 1st of October, I've made quite a few more entries to my sketchbook. I think the last one that I showed in the first video was the strawberry, the wild strawberry there. So the one that I made in October was the fly agaric, the Amanita muscaria fungi, which is the sort of iconic fungi that everybody recognises and has seen in Fantasia and films and cartoons and all sorts of things. So it's a bit of a favourite because it's just so striking, really. You can't miss it in the woods. And I've painted it a few times, and I painted it this year and I painted it the previous year as well, in this sort of little habitat study as well in the last sketchbook, which is a little bit more in depth than this year. So I didn't have as much time this year, so I did it just, they were uprooted, they were lying on the ground, so I just painted them so you could see the vulva as well, which you can't really see on the previous entry. So this was more of a little habitat study last year, and this one was just the mushrooms with some of the leaves that are associated with where these mushrooms grow, which is the birch leaves there, which turn yellow in autumn. So the fact that they were uprooted gave me the opportunity to look at the whole of the fungi, really. And there you can see one of the uprooted mushrooms with the leaves alongside. And I kind of filled the page there with the leaves and bits of moss, and the usual kind of approach. So what goes down on the page, as always, is the date, the name, and some information about the subject, you know, so the size of it, where it was found, what time of year it was found compared to last year, because I painted it last year as well. So you can refer back to your previous year and compare how many there were this year compared to last year and so on. So I have painted this subject quite a lot, and it was a subject also of a recent tutorial that I made on my website, which is www.botanical-art-online.com. So there's a tutorial of this one here, and there's 2 versions painted of it for that. Now, one of the methods used in this is something that I don't often use, and it's the use of masking fluid. And I used Schminky masking fluid, which I find quite good for these kind of spots. So you use it for the spots on the surface of the fungi, on the cap, if you like. Paint it on in the first layer using an old small paintbrush, and then add the red layers. And it's important that you add enough red layering before removing the masking fluid. And then you have to wait for it completely to dry, and you don't want to leave it on the paper for too long. That's the other thing. And some papers are happier with masking fluid than others. So I suggest that if you are going to use masking fluid, you try it out first on a little scrap of the paper that you're going to use it on. And this is the Schminky masking fluid that I used. And leave it on for maybe a day, and then take it off and see that it comes off okay. So when you do paint it on, as I said, you need to wait for it to dry completely. Don't risk putting layers of watercolour on masking fluid that's not dry. It's going to be a disaster. The other important thing to consider with these fungi is how you apply it. You have to look at the shape that these scales were actually covering. When the mushroom emerged from the ground, they completely covered it. It was like a solid creamy white covering, and as that cap expands, these move further and further apart with the expansion of the cap, and so they kind of form in rings, and some of them fall off with the wet, but they form in rings, so they have to sit on the contours of the surface. So when you apply that masking fluid, you have to they're not just spots and dots, they're raised scales on the surface, and they follow the contours of the surface, and that's really important in getting an accurate representation of the mushroom. And you can see it in that one. And this small one here, you can see they're much more densely packed in the small one, and in this old one here, there's far fewer of them, and some of them have probably dropped off or washed off with the rain. And they vary a lot. Some of them have very few, and some of them are absolutely covered in them. So observation is key. There's also on these ones there's this kind of ring which was part of this vulva when it emerged, and it kind of disappears. It's like a skirt almost on them. So observation again is a key thing with these mushrooms. Gills very tightly packed, and they're white to a cream colour. When the mushrooms are aging, they start to turn more yellow and grey like they are here. But when they're younger and fresher, they're much more white as they are here. So there's a lot of benefit in studying the same subject over and over, and that's the point I'm trying to make here, is that it's okay to study something 1 year in your journal or at one point in your journal, and then to revisit it again either the next year or in the same year when it's further developed. So if, for example, you have a subject that has flowers in the spring or summer and then fruit in the late summer or autumn, then you can revisit the same page and add to it. And I do that a lot in my sketchbook journals. But this one's relatively simple. This was quite a quick page to do because we just had 3 mushrooms and no habitat. The habitat does take quite a while, and that's in my tutorial, is how to paint that habitat as well. But this is a simple way of adding some important information about the habitat. So we know that this mushroom grows next to birch trees, and we can see that they're kind of autumn leaves. So it tells us about the time of year, and it tells us a little bit about the association with other plants and trees, and makes a sort of fuller page, more appealing, attractive page by having these subjects in the white areas of the page. The other page filler, of course, is always your colour swatches that you make first. So drawing first, colour swatches second, the painting of the main subject, and then the notes or the final addition. And that kind of fills the page. One other point that's worth considering here as well when you revisit a subject is the colour. And you'll notice that in the previous entry, this colour is brighter, it's more vivid, it's warmer than it is in these. And that's because these are younger, they're still in the ground, whereas this one's older, it's yellowing more, and the colour is fading. It's a darker, cooler red than this red. And that reflects in the colours that you use. And the colours are broadly the same. I think I used a different yellow. I used transparent yellow in this one. I used Windsor yellow in this one. You need a warm red and a cool red. So I use Scarlet Lake and Permanent Alizarin Crimson, or Permanent Carmine, either will do. This one I used Permanent Alizarin Crimson, and this one I used Permanent Carmine, which are very similar. But the emphasis is on the mix to have more of the cooler red in this mix than in the previous mix, and also less yellow. So I had a lot more stronger underlying yellow and violet. So violet's always used on these sort of lighter areas, and you can see that here around the highlights as violet on the more distant one. This one's paler because it's more distance, and that gives the impression of depth, so paint things paler, less saturated. Here we have violets and quite strong yellows underneath, whereas here we have some yellows on the edge, but not so much of the warmer reds in there. So I used a little bit more Permanent Carmine, the cooler red, than I did of the Scarlet Lake in this version compared to this version. So it's good as a sort of learning curve, and the differences between a young, fresh plant or fungi and an older one. So hopefully that gives you an insight into these pages on this Amanita muscaria. In the next video, I'm going to talk about a different plant. My latest entry, I've got a few more that I've done since then, including mistletoe. I've got another one on fungi that I haven't finished, but I've got one that I've just completed, which is on Astantia major, which is great and masterworked. And it's quite a difficult one to paint because it's a pale coloured flower, sort of predominantly green and white, and actually show you some of the stages of the progress of the page as well, because normally I just paint them and I don't document them, but because I've started this new channel, I've documented various stages of it, from the drawing through to the colour chart and to the final painting. So I'll be talking about that one in the next video.